a new life starts. Spiderman worked very hard. Every day, terrible things happened in New York. Every day, Spiderman helped people. Soon, Spiderman was big news in New York. All the newspapers had stories about him. But who was he? No one knew. A few weeks later, Peter walked alone through the streets of Manhattan. Suddenly, he saw MJ come out of a restaurant. "Hi, MJ!" he called. "Hi," she smiled. "What are you doing around here?" "I'm looking for a job," he answered. "What about you?" I'm working on Broadway now," she said. "Hey, that's great, MJ. You're living your dream." But then a man came out of the restaurant. The man was angry with MJ. The day's money wasn't right. $6 wasn't there. MJ shouted back at the man. Then she turned to Peter. "Some dream," she said. "I work here." "There are worse jobs." "Don't tell Harry," she said. "Harry?" "We're going out," she said. "Didn't he tell you?" "Oh, yeah. Right," he said. MJ turned to go. "Let's get together again sometime," she smiled, and then she left. Back at the flat, Peter was very sad. He didn't have a job, and MJ was Harry's girlfriend now. Then he saw the front of the Daily Bugle newspaper. "Dollars for photos of Spiderman." Peter smiled. "I know just the right man for the job," he thought. Chapter 6. The Photographer. The next morning, Peter went out with his Spiderman costume and his camera. When bad things happened on the streets of New York, he put his camera up high. Then Spiderman did his good work, and the camera took the pictures. Mr. Jameson looked quickly at Peter's photos. He was the top man at the Daily Bugle newspaper. He loved the pictures, but he didn't say it. "You can have $200, he said. "That's not much," Peter answered. "OK, $300, said Mr. Jameson. "And bring me more." Peter left the newspaper building with $300, and the next day his photo of Spiderman was on the front of the paper. Not bad for a morning's work. All the important people at Oscorp sat around a table. Norman Osborn talked about Oscorp's good work. "Quest Aerospace is big, but we are bigger," he said. "That's great news, Norman," said one of the men. "Because of this, we are selling Oscorp." "What?" said Osborn. "Quest Aerospace is giving us a lot of money." "Why didn't you tell me?" "They didn't want a big fight, and they don't want you." "You can't do this to me," said Osborn. "I started Oscorp. I gave everything to Oscorp." "That's true," said Fargas, Osborn's number 2, "but we all want this. We're selling after the Oscorp World Unity Festival. I'm sorry, Norman." The Oscorp World Unity Festival was a street party in Times Square. Lots of families were there. Peter was there for the Daily Bugle newspaper. Fargas and the other Oscorp people watched from the first floor of a beautiful old building. Peter saw Harry and MJ there too, but not Norman Osborn. Suddenly, Peter's spider sense screamed. He heard something in the sky. Everybody looked up. It was a green goblin on a glider. Oscorp's glider. The people stopped and watched the glider. It was fantastic. The glider moved very fast through Times Square. The Green Rider laughed crazily. He moved close to Fargas, and suddenly the wall of the building exploded. Everyone screamed. Fargas and the other Oscorp people were dead. Peter looked for MJ. She wasn't dead. But she's going to fall, thought Peter. The Green Goblin came up close to MJ and laughed crazily. He had terrible yellow eyes and teeth. But then someone in red and blue crashed into the Green Goblin with his feet. It was Spiderman. Spiderman went after the Green Goblin. Then Spiderman and the Green Goblin started to fight, and the Goblin hit Spiderman right across the street. MJ screamed, "Help! Help!" Spiderman heard her and jumped up, but the Green Goblin crashed into him, and they both crashed into a window. The Green Goblin hit Spiderman. Then Spiderman jumped down near to MJ. He shot webbing at the Goblin's face. Then he pulled some parts out of the glider. Part of the glider exploded. The Green Goblin took his glider up into the sky. Suddenly, MJ screamed again. Spiderman jumped down to her. He shot webbing onto a building and pulled her into his arms. He was just in time. He shot more webbing and moved from building to building with MJ in his arms. MJ wasn't frightened. It was so exciting. He left her in a garden on top of a building. "Wait!" she called. "Who are you?" "You know me. I'm Spiderman." And then he wasn't there. Chapter 7. We Can Work Together. That night, Norman Osborn was alone at home. He read the evening newspaper. There was a story about the Oscorp people. They were all dead. Who did it? He thought. We did it. Who said that? You know, came the answer. Osborn looked around the empty room. Where are you? He cried. I'm right here. He started to understand. It was in his head. It was him. Ha ha ha! Laughed the Green Goblin. This is only the start. Only one person can stop us. Or maybe he can work with us. And now Osborn knew. He was the Green Goblin. The Green Goblin crashed through the window of the Daily Bugle. Who takes Spiderman's photos? He shouted. His hands were around Mr. Jameson. Suddenly, Spiderman was at the window. Put him down! He shouted. But the Green Goblin shot sleeping gas into Spiderman's face. Then he put Spiderman on his glider and left the building quickly. A little later, Spiderman opened his eyes. He was on top of a tall building. Wake up, Spiderman, the Green Goblin said quietly. You're not dead, but you can't move. You are very special, Spiderman. You and I are not so different, he said. We can work together. He jumped onto his glider. Think about it, he said. A week later, Peter went to find MJ. She came out of a building on Broadway. Hey, MJ, called Peter. It's me again. Hi, Peter. Did they give you the part? Asked Peter. They didn't like me, said MJ sadly. Let's go for a burger. You can have anything. Up to $7.84. MJ laughed. I'd like that, she said. Oh, but I'm going out to dinner with Harry. Come with us. No, thanks, said Peter. MJ turned and walked away. It started to rain. She knew a quick way and walked down a dark street. Suddenly, 4 men were around her. She hit one, and then another. And suddenly he was there. Spiderman shot webbing at the 4 men. He pulled them back from MJ. The men hit him, but Spiderman was stronger. The men ran away, and Spiderman jumped onto a wall. He came down the wall head first. You saved me again, said MJ. You are fantastic. I want to thank you this time. MJ moved close to Spiderman, and they kissed slowly. Suddenly, the world stopped. It was a fantastic kiss. On Thanksgiving Day, Peter was on 6th Avenue. A tall building was on fire. My little boy's in there, a woman screamed. Spiderman jumped up into the building. He saved the boy and gave him to his mother. Then they heard another scream. There's someone still up there, a woman shouted. Spiderman jumped back into the building. Where are you? He called. Then he saw an old woman. The woman turned around. It was the Green Goblin. You, said Peter. So, Spiderman, he said. Are we a team or not? Not, said Peter. No one says no to me, shouted the Green Goblin. He hit Spiderman hard, but Spiderman jumped and hit him back. Then there was an explosion. Spiderman jumped out of a window and back into the street. MJ, Aunt May, and Norman Osborn were with Harry at his flat. It was time for Thanksgiving lunch. Peter walked in the door. Sorry, I'm late, he said. Everyone sat down at the table. Mr. Osborn looked very closely at Peter. Their eyes met for a few seconds. Then Mr. Osborn jumped up from his chair. I must go, he said quickly. I'm sorry, everyone. Harry followed his father out of the flat. What are you doing? He asked angrily. What about MJ? She's important to me. Harry, please. Look at her. Beautiful girls only like rich men for their money. Have fun with MJ, and then forget her. The others heard everything. Mr. Osborn left and Harry came in. Well, Harry, you didn't say much for me, did you? Said MJ. Your father said some terrible things. My father's a great man. You don't know anything about him. MJ walked to the door. I'm sorry, Aunt May, she said. Then she walked out and closed the door behind her. Chapter 8. The Last Fight. Late that night, Aunt May was alone in her bedroom. She looked at a photo of Uncle Ben. Suddenly, the bedroom wall exploded. The Green Goblin was there on his glider. He looked at her with his terrible yellow eyes and laughed crazily. Peter ran to Aunt May's room at the hospital. She wasn't dead. Her face was white, and she cried out, Those terrible yellow eyes! What happened? Shouted Peter. But no one answered. Peter stopped for a second. Then he understood. He knows, he thought. The Green Goblin knows Aunt May. He knows Peter Parker is Spider-Man. Peter sat by Aunt May's bed all night. The next day, MJ came to the hospital. "How is she?" she asked Peter. "She's going to be okay," said Peter. "Did you talk to Harry?" "No, I didn't. The thing is, I'm in love with, don't laugh, Spider-Man." In her bed, Aunt May opened her eyes and listened. "Oh, him," said Peter. "Well, he is very cool. I know him a bit. I take photos of him." "Does he talk about me?" "Yeah, I talked to him about you. Once I said, 'You know, Spider-Man, the great thing about MJ is you look into her eyes and you feel stronger, excited, but frightened at the same time.'" "You said that?" MJ smiled and took Peter's hand. Aunt May heard everything, and she smiled too. The door opened quietly, and Harry came into the room. MJ pulled her hand away, but it was too late. They all knew. Harry went to his father's home. "You were right about MJ," he said to his father. "You're right about everything. She's in love with Peter." "Parker," his father said quietly. "And how does he feel about her?" "Peter was in love with MJ when he was 6, and he still loves her." Mr. Osborne smiled. Then he looked at Harry sadly. "I'm so sorry. I wasn't always there for you, but now things are going to be different. I'm going to make things right," he said, and took Harry in his arms. Back at the hospital, Aunt May looked at Peter. Peter smiled back. "A smile," said Aunt May. "And you smiled at MJ earlier today too. You love MJ, Peter. Please tell her. Everyone knows you love her." But suddenly Peter thought of the Green Goblin. "Just a second, Aunt May," he said, and he left the room. He called MJ's number, but she didn't answer. "MJ?" he shouted. "Are you there?" Then he heard a crazy laugh at the other end of the phone. "Can Spider-Man come out to play?" It was the Green Goblin. "Where is she?" Peter cried. MJ woke up. It was night. She looked down. She was high up on the Queensborough Bridge. This was a bad dream, right? A cable car took people from Manhattan to Roosevelt Island. The lights were on in the cable car. She saw some children in the cable car. Then she heard a crazy laugh. It was the Green Goblin on his glider. The Green Goblin shot at the cable car station on Roosevelt Island. The station exploded, and the cable car stopped over the water. Seconds later, Spider-Man was there. Suddenly, there was a terrible sound. "The cable is breaking," thought Spider-Man. The cable car started to fall. "I can't save them. There isn't time." Then the Green Goblin took the cable in his hand and saved the children. With the cable in his right hand, he glided up to MJ. He took her in his left arm and shouted, "Spider-Man, who is going to die? The woman you love or the little children? You choose." And then the Green Goblin opened both his hands. In a second, Spider-Man jumped down and took MJ in his arms. Then he took the cable in his other hand. He shot webbing at Queensborough Bridge and stopped the fall of the cable car. Spiderman said to MJ, "Go down the cable to the cable car." "I can't." "Yes, you can, MJ." Slowly, she went down. Peter turned, and the Green Goblin crashed into him. The Green Goblin laughed and turned the glider. "It's time to die," he cried, and glided fast back under Queensborough Bridge. And then something hit the Green Goblin. The glider went around and around crazily. The people on the bridge shouted at the Green Goblin and hit him with bits from the bridge. Carefully, Spiderman put the cable car down onto a big boat under the bridge. The Green Goblin shot a cable around Peter's body. Then he took Peter to an old building on Roosevelt Island. There he hit Peter again and again. "I'm going to finish MJ very slowly," said the Green Goblin. Peter looked up. He was angry. He hit the Green Goblin hard again and again. He shot webbing at a wall and pulled. It crashed down on the Green Goblin. At last, the fight was over. "Peter, stop!" the Green Goblin cried. "It's me." He pulled off his mask. The tired face of Norman Osborn looked at Spiderman. "Mr. Osborn," said Peter. "Peter, those Oscorp people are dead because of you." "No, that was the Green Goblin, not me. You can save me, Peter. I'm like a father to you. Give me your hand." "I had a father. His name was Ben Parker." Peter's spider sense was working well. "I can feel the glider behind me," he thought. Suddenly, he jumped up high. The glider moved very fast. It glided right through Norman Osborn's body. "Peter," said Mr. Osborn before he died, "don't tell Harry." Spiderman took Mr. Osborn's body back to his house. Harry came into his father's room. He saw Spiderman and the dead body. "What did you do?" he shouted. But Spiderman left quickly through the window. Chapter 9. MJ's Surprise. Harry was very sad and alone. Aunt May, MJ and Peter were there. Everyone was in black. "I'm so sorry, Harry," said Peter. "It's difficult without a father, I know." "It was Spiderman," said Harry. "My father is dead, and Spiderman must pay." Harry looked at Peter sadly. "You're the only family I have now." A little later, MJ and Peter talked together under some trees. "Peter," said MJ, "I almost died on that bridge. But I thought about someone, and it wasn't Spiderman. It was you, Peter." Peter smiled. "Really?" "The thing is, I love you, Peter. I love you so much." She put her arms around him and they kissed. Peter's love for MJ was strong, but it wasn't easy for Peter. He pulled away from her. "There are things I can't tell you," he said. "But I'm always going to be there for you, MJ. I will always be your friend." MJ's eyes opened in surprise. "Only your friend?" "That's all I have," answered Peter. And he walked away.